Hello, boy! It is good to be back after Bad Movie Month is over, and it was good to get a palate cleanser. Very good indeed. Alrighty, so I decided to jump in with a movie I haven't seen, and had been on my radar for years, really. And it's kind of an older film, and I've known about it for over 10 years, and I just never got around to it. It's one of those movies where I had passed in a video store way back in the day when I worked at one, but never paid it much thought because it just wasn't that eye-catching of a cover. And it was only a little bit later that I started hearing about this movie's reputation. And by the time I finally decided to move and see it, well, that was right when the video stores all began shutting down, and this one went by the wayside as well. So, but finally tracked down my own copy, so I gave a watch to Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer. And this movie's got a bit of a reputation for obvious reasons if you've seen it. Now, it's, I believe, one of the first movies to be rated NC-17. I believe it was originally rated X, but it's technically listed as unrated on here, but I believe at the time it was one of the few movies that inspired the NC-17 rating. And I can see why. But at the same time, I guess the reputation was built up a little bit higher, and I might have been expecting a little more. Not really a fault of the movie itself, but it's one of those things where the legend has kind of begun to outgrow the source material. Now, I guess we'll jump into the plot here. It's about a serial killer, and that's pretty much really what it is. It's just essentially taking a snippet of a serial killer's life, showing this chunk of it, and it feels like a little bit like you jumped in after the beginning of the movie, and you pull out before the end, because that's kind of how the movie is set. It's just a period of time in the serial killer's life. Now, the events of the film were loosely inspired by the actual serial killer, Henry Lee Lucas, who became most notable for the amount of murders he confessed to. But at the same time, his confessions later were, after a while, he was such a pathological liar, he was confessing to any murder that was brought to him. Though it is still believed he killed about 30 to 40 people, despite him confessing to over 3,000 murders. So, the real Henry Lee Lucas aside, several of the characters in this movie are also inspired by actual people, but they don't bear nearly as much of a resemblance. So, this movie is set with... so, Henry is living with his friend Otis, and Otis's younger sister is recently separated from her husband and is just moved in with them. And so we're kind of getting her eyes into this life. And it gets graphic. I will say this movie is strongest at the beginning, really when it's... At first, it takes a second for you to figure out what's going on, as you just see Henry going about his daily life, intercut with rather graphic bodies, while you hear just faintly the sounds and kind of a distorted sound of how the killings happen, just kind of playing over the already corpse, and those images are haunting. They do very well there. Other than that, it pretty much follows them around as Henry just does his thing, looks for victims, and, well, begins instructing his friend Otis on killing people. Seems Otis has some hard times, so he takes him under his wing and shows him how to do murders. While his sister, her name's escaping me at the second, but she starts kind of getting a thing for Henry, so it's kind of an awkward dynamic there, particularly with Otis kind of lusting after his own sister. So this movie is definitely has some disturbing aspects to it. The sister's name was Becky. Becky. So, the death scenes, graphic and inventive, though the movie's clearly operating on a low budget. Most of the deaths are showing crimes that have already been committed. There's only a couple that are actually on, and those are usually mostly just necks being broken. Though there is one scene that looked almost out of A Clockwork Orange with them killing a family after breaking into their home. And not shying away from killing kids as well. So it's definitely... It does not pull its punches. It's not your typical slasher movie by any means. It's more of a dark, brooding look into this than into, well, a serial killer's life. And I believe this is one of the first roles for Michael Rooker, actually. So I can see why this definitely helped put him on the map. It is a very well done film, I will say that. The only problems I was having with it are mostly with how much it had been blown up, that I was expecting something a lot more intense. But at the same time, I do see that a lot of other movies that were probably inspired took a few cues from Henry. The Poughkeepsie tapes, which I was very fond of last October when I finally saw that one, I would put in the same kind of category as this one. It's dark, brooding, and disturbing, and that one, while more on a fictitious killer, this kind of the same general gist. But that one's more of a found footage looking through the killer's tapes. Well, this one, well, you are following around the killer. Though he does actually start making some kind of tapes just to goof around. But just the way the characters interact and bounce off of each other, they are very believable as some flawed people and how they interact. That said, this movie is definitely not for everyone. While the gore effects are not really that strong, there's some disturbing corpses that are left around, and there is some sexual assault and a rape that is quite graphic. But I've seen a lot more in terms of disturbing, but overall it didn't really... While I was hoping for more, it didn't really take me too far out of it. So I can definitely respect the movie for giving some inspiration to some others as well. So I've been debating where to put this one on my MacGuffins. I was originally thinking about a 3 MacGuffin, but the more I think about it, I'm going to kick it up to a 4, just because of the legacy it left on some other films, I believe. So Henry is definitely worth seeing, but by today's standards, it's not nearly as disturbing as plenty of other movies, but it is definitely still graphic. Yeah. I'm definitely happy I finally saw this one. Don't know if there's anything else to really go into on it. This movie was definitely raised some controversies at the time, as there weren't really movies like this. Most horror films were moral lessons with, and then most slasher films in particular were a bunch of kids doing things they shouldn't and then being killed by a killer. This one drawing from real life, and the killer doesn't really get any comeuppance throughout the film. He's mostly, in a way, our protagonist. Despite us following Becky around, he's really the main character, and I wouldn't say you were actually rooting for Henry, but it's a tough movie to quantify. Part of it did kind of remind me of like a Rob Zombie Devil's Rejects sort of thing, for a little bit less over the top. So it kind of has that sort of grimy feel to it. So 4 MacGuffins for Henry. And, yeah. Good to be off Bad Movie Month. I'm probably going to be jumping on to a lot more movies because my watch pile is just growing bigger and bigger, and if I'm going to keep up with it, I'm going to have to start posting more, so expect to be hearing from me quite frequently. If anyone actually starts watching the show, of course. Well, take care, everybody, and I'll see you soon.